Hi everyone, my name is Kamali Ilani Wetherell and I'm a first-year criminal justice PhD student here at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Today I'm excited to present to you research that I've been working on with my colleague, Dr. Terry Meathy, entitled Cold Cases, an analysis of definitional issues, prevalence, and investigative methods. So the term cold case has been increasingly used to describe incidents of unsolved crimes. While the term often refers to homicides, cold cases may also include other incidents like unsolved property crimes, sexual assaults, suspicious deaths, and missing persons. Cold cases are frequently the subject of popular media, covered in TV shows, documentaries, podcasts, books, and so on. Notorious cases like the Zodiac Killer, John Benet Ramsey, Amelia Earhart, and Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 continue to spark curiosity and discussion. And you've likely heard about these highly publicized cases. But what about all the unsolved crimes and mysterious incidents that you haven't heard of? Well, these types of cases have accumulated to the point of constituting a cold case crisis, according to the National Institute of Justice. In 2019, less than half of serious violent crimes and only a fifth of property crimes were successfully cleared by arrest. There were also over 85,000 active missing persons cases under investigation that same year. Even with this ever-growing backlog of cases, there is a lack of formal consensus as to what exactly constitutes a cold case. These definitional inconsistencies may impact how and which cases are investigated, and ultimately whether a case is closed. As such, this project provides an overview of definitional issues, case typologies and prevalence, current investigative strategies, and implications for improving solvability. So, given this gap in the current research literature, this study is guided by the following research questions. 1. How are cold cases defined in existing research, practice, and policy? 2. What are the major typologies of cold cases? 3. What is the prevalence of various case types? And 4. How are current investigative strategies being used to combat cold cases? So there is currently no official standardized definition for the term cold case amongst the public, practitioners, or scholars. Definitions vary by organization and encompass different actions and timeframes. Take, for example, the National Institute of Justice definition, which states a cold case is any case whose probative investigative leads have been exhausted. Now, compare this to the definition provided by the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch, where cold cases can include missing persons, accidents, or crimes that have yet to be solved and have no active leads. At minimum, to be considered a cold case, an incident must be reported to police and investigated in some capacity. As many crimes are unreported or unknown to the police altogether, many cold cases could be unaccounted for. So this may be further complicated once individual police department definitions are factored in. The variation in agency definitions of cold cases is pictured here using publicly available data drawn from the official websites of the 10 largest police departments in the United States. Given that cold cases historically refer to unsolved homicide, most definitions reflect this, as shown by Dallas and Philadelphia PD. Other departments specify the amount of time that must pass from the crime initially occurring and being investigated before it is considered cold. While this requirement ranges, with Phoenix PD requiring just 1 year with no active leads, while LAPD requires 5 years or more. Additionally, the type of incident also plays a role. The NIJ definition given earlier stated that any case could be considered cold, while the ISB definition included missing persons and accidents specifically. Similarly, Las Vegas Metropolitan PD specified suspicious deaths and missing persons cases as well. The majority of definitions also include both unsolved homicide and sexual assault, suggesting that cold cases definitely encompass acts beyond homicide alone. Finally, some departments, such as Chicago PD, have no existing definition for the term cold case whatsoever. This also means that depending on the jurisdiction and the definition used, the same case may not always be considered cold. Crimes are often considered cold when they are not yet cleared by police. Clearance typically occurs when an individual is arrested for an offense or through exceptional means, such as if the offender dies. If no suspect is identified, however, or if an offender is pinpointed but not arrested, charged, and prosecuted, then a case may still be considered cold. So, based on the existing definitions used in investigative practice, policy, and research, cold cases include both criminal and non-criminal events. First, here are typologies of criminal cold cases. There are three broad categories of crimes: crimes against persons, property, and society. Essentially, any crime that can be grouped into these categories can be considered cold if it is uncleared. The majority of cold case definitions center around crimes against persons. Included here are unsolved homicides and suspicious deaths, as well as other violent crimes such as kidnappings, abductions, missing persons, and sex crimes. For example, the kidnapping and death of Amber Hagerman in 1966, which inspired the creation of the Amber Alert system, still remains cold. Crimes against property could also be considered cold if uncleared by police. This includes things like arson, burglary, theft, heists, white-collar crime, and even cybercrime. For instance, white-collar criminal Christopher Burns committed millions of dollars in fraud and then disappeared. He currently remains wanted by the FBI. Additionally, in 2007, nearly 95 million credit and debit cards were exposed in the TJ Maxx Marshalls data breach, while the perpetrators still remain unknown today. Finally, crimes against society, such as terrorism, vice crimes, weapons violations, and animal cruelty, can also be considered cold. Weapons violations and animal cruelty specifically are important to mention here because these acts often connect to other types of victimization, such as homicide. News has been circulating, for example, in Las Vegas about an individual who has been killing and injuring pet dogs by throwing poisoned meatballs and other substances in people's backyards. Despite such acts happening in local neighborhoods for about 8 years now, the offender still remains unknown. So now for non-criminal case typologies. So cold cases can also include acts that are not criminal whatsoever, as well as incidents where it is somewhat unclear whether the act was criminal in nature. So long as the incident was investigated by police and remains unexplained, the case could in theory be considered cold. So 4 main types are included here: missing persons, unidentified persons, suspicious deaths, and accidents. Missing persons cases demonstrate the many overlaps between criminal and non-criminal cases. Some individuals may go missing voluntarily, such as adults who decide to disappear intentionally, which in and itself is not illegal, meaning that no crime has actually occurred. However, this is untrue for all cases, such as with missing juveniles or the cases of the thousands of missing Indigenous women in the US and Canada, like those advocated for by the No More Stolen Sisters movement. Similarly, cases of unidentified persons, suspicious deaths, and accidents could also be non-criminal if acts like suicide, death by natural causes, or pure accident were the cause. So, in an ideal world, this description of criminal and non-criminal cold cases is more of a Venn diagram, as many of the cases actually overlap and share a lot of characteristics. Now, in terms of prevalence, over 7 million crimes were reported in 2019, with 60% being crimes against property, 24% being crimes against persons, and 16% being crimes against society. In the commission of these crimes, over 5 million people were victimized. Victims tended to be female, about 24 years old, and white. A summary of the percentage of the cases that remain uncleared is presented in the table to the right. These figures show that most violent and property crimes are unsolved. The crimes that were cleared least often were motor vehicle theft and burglary, while unidentified and missing persons cases, as well as murder, were actually cleared most often. So now that we've talked a lot about what a cold case is, how do we actually address them? Well, research has revealed various ways to increase solvability and clearance of these cases. As for what works, advances in DNA and forensic science have allowed cold cases to be reopened, reinvestigated, and prosecuted even decades later. Research also highlights the benefits of collecting evidence with accuracy and urgency. Solvability increases when new information is gathered from victims, witnesses, suspects, and new and old evidence. Investigators themselves also report feeling more confident in successful case outcomes when unsolved cases are reopened sooner rather than later. Further, a cost-benefit analysis found that millions, even billions, could be saved annually by more quickly analyzing forensic evidence. Quicker processing times increase the likelihood of offenders being identified and apprehended faster, meaning there would be fewer additional crimes committed while a case remained open. There would also be fewer cases contributing to the ever-growing unsolved crime backlog. So, in addition to these strategies, police agencies also often form cold case units or squads with dedicated personnel and resources that prioritize specific cases to review. The first cold case squad was formed by Miami-Dade PD in 1983, with many others following suit in the 1990s. Larger agencies with more resources tended to clear about 20% of the cases that they reopened, while generally increasing the overall productivity of the department. Typically, these squads were formed of officers with great dedication and passion for their work, with one detective noting, quote, "Cold cases are never closed, but simply suspended until new opportunities arise." Interagency communication and collaboration have also been identified as ways to help improve cold case solvability. A main focus here is overcoming linkage blindness, or the tendency of police not to share information or cooperate with each other on investigations. This criticism was frequently raised in regard to the Zodiac killer case. However, VICAP, or the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, has been pinpointed as a way to help overcome linkage blindness by allowing departments to share information digitally, as well as notifying users when case similarities are found. Additionally, collaborations between police departments and other entities have shown promise with regards to cold cases. For instance, in Germany, students worked with local police and DAs to examine and locate new evidence in cold cases. Based on the diagram shown here, in just 7 cases, students were able to identify over 600 new leads, which eventually funneled down into 12 initially undetected overlaps with other cases and offenders. This new info increased the overall solvability and highlights the value of collaborating with different entities on these types of cases. Finally, technology also provides various ways to help address cold cases. For example, San Antonio PD solved 2 murders by posting info about the cases on their department website and then gaining tips from the public through email. Many departments now publicize lists of active, unsolved cases on their websites. So in conclusion, cold cases are complex and wide-reaching, encompassing both criminal and non-criminal behaviors. There is great variation amongst departments as to who and what constitutes a cold case. The cold case crisis presents a substantial problem for victims, police, and society overall. Such cases impact public trust and perceptions of the justice system, as well as the likelihood that individuals will actually report crime and participate in investigations. This is especially important given that new evidence, largely from victims and witnesses themselves, greatly helps to improve case solvability. Ultimately, there appears to be a need to more clearly define what exactly a cold case is, as well as policies and practices for how to best mitigate them. Resources must be allocated in ways that prioritize preventing crimes from going cold in the first place, but also to establish best practices for how to address a case if it does indeed go cold. Thank you so much for your time. Please let me know if you have any questions.